I'm Jasmine Brooks, 45 years old, and 6 months ago I felt invisible, dismissed, and questioned my own worth in a matter of minutes. But what happened next taught me something even more important about the power of speaking truth and community solidarity. If you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel like you don't belong somewhere you have every right to be, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this experience. I moved to this affluent suburban town 8 years ago when my consulting business really took off. I was drawn to the tree-lined streets, the highly rated schools for my teenage daughter, and what seemed like a welcoming community. The downtown area had this charming collection of locally owned restaurants and boutiques, and I imagined myself becoming part of this tight-knit community. During my first few months, I joined the local business association, volunteered for the annual street festival, and made it a point to shop and dine locally whenever possible. Building my place in this community became a mission of mine. I attended every town hall meeting, contributed to local charities, and made sure my business was visible at community events. My consulting firm sponsored the Little League team, and I served on the planning committee for the annual arts festival. I built relationships with other business owners, exchanged pleasantries with neighbors during my morning runs, and felt genuinely welcomed. My daughter thrived in her new school, making friends easily, and I thought we'd found our forever home. People knew my name at the coffee shop, the bookstore owner saved new releases she thought I'd enjoy, and the town felt like the kind of place where everyone looked out for each other. For about 5 years, I felt completely integrated into this community. My typical Saturday involved brunch at one of the local spots, shopping at the farmers market where vendors greeted me by name, and often running into neighbors for impromptu conversations. I served as treasurer for the PTA, helped organize the annual charity auction, and even hosted a book club that drew women from across the neighborhood. My business was thriving, my daughter was thriving, and I had genuine friendships with women I'd met through various community activities. I remember feeling so grateful during those years, thinking about how far I'd come and how perfectly everything had fallen into place. But looking back now, there were small signs I either missed or explained away. The hostess at my favorite restaurant always seemed slightly surprised when I made reservations, asking twice for my name and number. Sales associates would follow me a bit too closely in certain stores, offering help with an edge of suspicion rather than genuine service. At networking events, I often found myself being the one to initiate conversations, and people seemed surprised by my expertise or position. When my daughter started dating a white classmate, I overheard a comment about mixing that made my stomach turn, but I convinced myself I'd misunderstood. These moments felt isolated then, like individual misunderstandings rather than pieces of a larger pattern. The evening that changed everything started like so many others. My closest friend in town, Jennifer, had been raving about this new upscale Italian restaurant that had opened downtown. We'd been trying to get dinner there for weeks, but they were always booked solid. When Jennifer called that Thursday afternoon saying she'd managed to get a last-minute reservation for Friday night, I was thrilled. This place had become the talk of the town, and I was excited to finally experience what everyone was talking about. I had spent the last 8 years building what I thought was genuine belonging in this community. My consulting business focused on helping companies develop more inclusive workplace cultures, and I'd built my reputation on understanding organizational dynamics and bringing people together. I'd graduated from Spelman College with a business degree, earned my MBA from Emory, and worked my way up in corporate America before striking out on my own. My parents had raised me to believe that education, hard work, and treating people with respect would open doors and earn me a place anywhere I chose to go. My father, a postal worker who'd worked double shifts to put me through college, always told me to work twice as hard and be twice as good. My mother, a teacher, taught me to speak up for myself while maintaining my dignity. They'd navigated their own challenges during the civil rights era, and they believed the world I'd inherit would be different, fairer. I'd internalized their optimism and their strategies, focusing on excellence and relationship building as my path to success and acceptance. The relationships I'd built in this community felt real and meaningful. Jennifer and I had bonded over our shared love of books and wine, spending countless evenings discussing everything from our daughter's college plans to our career ambitions. Sarah from the PTA had become someone I could call when I needed a last-minute favor or just wanted to vent about work stress. Maria from my book club had invited me to family barbecues, and her kids called me Aunt Jasmine. These weren't surface-level friendships. We'd shared personal struggles, celebrated each other's successes, and built the kind of trust that I thought transcended racial boundaries. My professional success in this community had been significant too. I'd landed several major contracts with local businesses, been invited to speak at the Chamber of Commerce, and had my expertise featured in the local newspaper. I'd helped 3 different companies develop diversity and inclusion programs, and the feedback had been overwhelmingly positive. I felt valued not just for what I brought to the community socially, but for my professional expertise and business acumen. Friday evening arrived, and I spent extra time getting ready. I chose a navy blazer and matching pants, paired with a silk blouse and my favorite pearl earrings, professional but elegant, the kind of outfit that commanded respect. I wanted to look the part for this sophisticated restaurant that had become such a symbol of our town's upscale dining scene. I arrived 5 minutes early, as I always do, and approached the hostess stand with confidence. The hostess, a young white woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, barely looked up from her reservation book when I approached. "Good evening," I said with a warm smile. "I have a reservation under Brooks for 7:30. She flipped through several pages, frowning slightly. "Brooks," she muttered, running her finger down the lists. "I'm sorry, but I don't see anything under that name. Are you sure you made a reservation?" Her tone carried a hint of skepticism that made my chest tighten. "Actually, the reservation might be under Jennifer Walsh," I explained, maintaining my pleasant demeanor. "She made it for 2 people. The hostess continued flipping pages, her expression growing more impatient. "I'm sorry, but we're completely booked tonight. There's nothing available." She didn't offer to double-check with a manager or suggest alternatives. She simply stood there, clearly expecting me to leave. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "Could you please check again? I'm supposed to meet my friend here at 7:30. The hostess sighed audibly and made a show of checking the book one more time. "Ma'am, I've looked thoroughly. We don't have any availability tonight. You're welcome to try calling tomorrow for a future date." Her dismissiveness stung, but I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Jennifer had gotten the day wrong, or maybe there had been a genuine mix-up. I stepped outside and called Jennifer, who answered on the second ring. "Jasmine, I'm running about 10 minutes late. Did you get us seated already?" I explained what had happened, and there was a long pause on the other end. "That's so strange," Jennifer said. "Let me call them right now and see what's going on." Within 5 minutes my phone rang again. "I just spoke to them," Jennifer said, sounding confused. "They found our reservation immediately and said they'd been holding our table. They seemed really apologetic about the mix-up." The knot in my stomach tightened. I hung up and stared at the restaurant's warm, glowing windows, watching as couples and groups were seated at tables throughout the dining room. The hostess who had turned me away was smiling brightly at a white couple, leading them to a prime table near the window. I felt a familiar sensation I'd hoped I'd left behind years ago: the hypervigilance, the questioning of my own perceptions, the exhausting mental gymnastics of trying to determine whether what I'd just experienced was really about race. When Jennifer arrived, I watched from across the street as she approached the same hostess stand. The young woman's face immediately brightened. "Walsh, party of 2, right this way. We have a lovely table for you." No searching through pages, no questioning the reservation's existence, just warm efficiency and immediate service. I felt physically sick watching this interaction, but I knew I needed to see this through. I waited a few more minutes before walking back into the restaurant. Jennifer was already seated at a beautiful corner table, looking around for me with concern. I approached their table directly, bypassing the hostess stand entirely. "Sorry I'm late," I said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, pulling out my chair and sitting down. The hostess who had turned me away was suddenly at our table, her face flushed with embarrassment and something that looked like panic. "Oh, I didn't realize," she stammered, looking back and forth between Jennifer and me. "There must have been some confusion earlier." Jennifer, who had been watching this interaction with growing understanding, looked at the hostess with barely concealed anger. "What kind of confusion?" she asked sharply. "This is Jasmine Brooks. She's been my friend for 5 years, and she was here 15 minutes ago for our 7:30 reservation." The hostess's discomfort was palpable. She couldn't explain why she'd found the reservation immediately when Jennifer called, but couldn't locate it when I stood in front of her. She couldn't explain why she'd been so quick to dismiss me while being so accommodating to Jennifer. Other diners were starting to notice the tension at our table, and I could feel their curious stares. The manager appeared within minutes, clearly summoned by the hostess who was trying to contain a situation that was spiraling beyond her control. He was an older white man with gray hair and an expensive suit, carrying himself with the kind of authority that came from years of running upscale establishments. "Ladies, I understand there was some confusion this evening. Please allow me to apologize and ensure you have an excellent dining experience." But I was past the point of polite acceptance. "There was no confusion," I said clearly, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. "Your hostess told me you were fully booked when I arrived for my reservation. When my white friend called 5 minutes later, that same reservation suddenly existed and the table was available. I'd like you to explain that to me." The manager's face went through several expressions: surprise, discomfort, calculation. "I'm sure there was simply a miscommunication," he said, his tone conciliatory but not apologetic. "These things happen in busy restaurants. Please, let me offer you both complimentary appetizers for the inconvenience." He was trying to smooth over the situation without acknowledging what had actually happened. Jennifer, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "No," she said firmly. "This wasn't a miscommunication. This was discrimination, and you need to address it honestly." Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of privilege and confidence, and the manager's demeanor shifted when she spoke. Suddenly, he was listening more carefully, taking the accusation more seriously. But the damage was done. I could feel the stares from other diners, some sympathetic, others uncomfortable, a few openly hostile. This beautiful restaurant that I'd been excited to try had become the site of one of the most humiliating experiences I'd had in years. I was angry at the hostess, angry at the manager's non-apology, angry at having to prove that I deserved basic human dignity, and angry at myself for being surprised that this could still happen in my carefully chosen, supposedly progressive community. We stayed for dinner because I refused to let them drive me away, but every bite tasted like ash. Jennifer and I barely spoke, both of us processing what had happened and what it meant. When we finally left, the hostess avoided eye contact, and the manager offered another hollow apology that acknowledged nothing and promised no change. That night, I lay awake replaying every moment of the evening. I found myself questioning things I'd been certain about hours earlier. Had I misunderstood somehow? Was there really a mix-up with the reservation system? But then I remembered the hostess's face when Jennifer arrived, the immediate warmth and efficiency, the stark contrast to how she'd treated me. I remembered the manager's careful non-apology, his focus on smoothing things over rather than addressing what had actually happened. I called my sister in Atlanta the next morning, needing to talk through what had happened with someone who would understand without explanation. "Jasmine," she said after I'd finished recounting the evening, "you know what this was. Stop trying to give them the benefit of the doubt they wouldn't give you." Her words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Over the next few days, I found myself paying attention to things I'd previously overlooked. I noticed how the sales clerk at the boutique downtown always asked if I needed help finding anything specific in a tone that suggested I might be lost or confused. I remembered how the hostess at my regular coffee shop always seemed slightly surprised when I ordered expensive drinks, as if she couldn't quite believe I belonged in that economic bracket. I recalled conversations at PTA meetings where my expertise was questioned in ways that my white colleagues never was. The pattern was there. I'd just been working so hard to belong, to believe in the post-racial fantasy of my chosen community, that I'd explained away dozens of small incidents rather than seeing them as part of a larger system that had never really accepted me as fully human, fully worthy, fully belonging. I started documenting these experiences, keeping a running list of microaggressions and moments of bias that I'd previously dismissed. The list grew longer than I'd expected, and I realized that my 8 years in this community had been filled with constant, low-level reminders that I was different, that I didn't quite belong, that I needed to prove myself in ways that others didn't. The restaurant incident had been just the most obvious, undeniable example of something that had been happening all along. 3 days after the restaurant incident, I was still processing what had happened when I ran into Sarah from the PTA at the grocery store. I'd been looking forward to talking with her about it, expecting sympathy and outrage from someone I considered a close friend. When I explained what had happened, her response shocked me. "Oh, Jasmine, I'm sure it was just a mistake," she said, her tone suggesting I was overreacting. "That place is always so busy, and the reservation system is probably complicated. I can't imagine Jennifer would choose to eat somewhere that discriminates." She seemed more concerned about giving the restaurant the benefit of the doubt than supporting me through a painful experience. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "Jennifer called 5 minutes after I was turned away, and they found our reservation immediately. The same hostess who told me they were fully booked seated Jennifer without question." Sarah's expression grew uncomfortable, and she glanced around as if hoping someone would rescue her from this conversation. "I just think there might be another explanation," she said weakly. "Maybe the computer was down when you first arrived, or maybe the hostess was new and made an honest mistake. These things happen." Her determination to find innocent explanations for what had clearly been discriminatory treatment was exhausting and revealing. This conversation with Sarah forced me to reevaluate other relationships I'd thought were solid. When I mentioned the incident to Maria from book club, she immediately pivoted to talking about how difficult these situations must be, but offered no real support or acknowledgement of the discrimination itself. When I brought it up at the next business association meeting, the response was awkward silence followed by someone quickly changing the subject. The people I'd considered allies were showing me that their comfort with our friendships depended on my not naming racism when I experienced it. They were happy to include me as long as I didn't make them confront the ways their community might be unwelcoming to people who looked like me. Jennifer was the notable exception. She called me the day after our conversation with Sarah, angry and determined. "I've been thinking about what happened all weekend," she said. "And I've been thinking about other times we've been out together when similar things happened, but I didn't recognize them. I need to do better as your friend, and I want to help you figure out how to address this." Her willingness to examine her own blind spots and commit to being a better ally meant everything to me. But it also highlighted how rare that kind of response was, even among people who considered themselves progressive and inclusive. I decided to document what had happened at the restaurant on social media. I crafted a detailed Facebook post describing the evening, naming the restaurant, and explaining why this kind of treatment was unacceptable. I wasn't trying to destroy a business, I was trying to create accountability and awareness. "Last Friday night, I experienced something I hoped I'd left in the past," I wrote. "I was denied seating at restaurant name with claims they were fully booked. When my white friend called 5 minutes later, our reservation suddenly existed and a table was available. When I joined her at the table, the hostess and manager offered non-apologies that acknowledged nothing and promised no change. This isn't about one bad employee or one misunderstanding, this is about a pattern of treatment that makes it clear who is welcome and who isn't. I'm sharing this because silence enables discrimination, and our community deserves better." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the post had been shared dozens of times. Comments poured in from other Black residents sharing similar experiences at the same restaurant and others in town. White community members expressed shock and outrage, with many saying they had no idea this was happening in our supposedly welcoming town. But there was also pushback. Several people commented that I was playing the race card or being too sensitive. Some suggested I was trying to get free meals or ruin a business over a simple mistake. A few accused me of being divisive and damaging to the community's reputation. The restaurant's owner tried to respond privately, sending me a Facebook message asking if we could discuss the situation offline to find a resolution. His message was full of corporate language about learning opportunities and improving our processes, but contained no real acknowledgement of what had happened or commitment to meaningful change. I declined his private outreach and instead encouraged him to respond publicly to demonstrate his commitment to change. When he failed to do so, more community members began sharing their own experiences and observations. The conversation grew beyond that one restaurant to broader patterns of exclusion and bias throughout our town. Within 2 weeks, the impact was undeniable. The restaurant that had been booked solid for months suddenly had empty tables every night. Community members were choosing to spend their money elsewhere, making it clear that discrimination wasn't welcome in our town. Local organizations began canceling events they'd planned to hold there. The sold-out establishment that had been the talk of the town was suddenly struggling to fill half their tables. I watched this transformation with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I was gratified that speaking up had created consequences for discriminatory behavior, but I was also sad that it had been necessary. I'd hoped for a different kind of response, acknowledgement, apology, and meaningful change, rather than the defensiveness and eventual consequences that unfolded. 3 months after my post, the restaurant owner announced they were closing. In his statement, he blamed false accusations and social media mob mentality for destroying his business. He took no responsibility for the discriminatory treatment that had started the entire conversation, instead positioning himself as the victim of unfair attacks. Some community members blamed me for the restaurant's closure, suggesting that I'd gone too far and destroyed livelihoods over a misunderstanding. But many more rallied around the principle that businesses that discriminate don't deserve community support. The conversation had revealed deep divisions in our town about race, accountability, and what kind of community we wanted to be. The months following the restaurant incident and its aftermath taught me valuable lessons about speaking truth and the power of community accountability. I learned that silence in the face of discrimination protects the system, not the people being harmed. I learned that some friendships aren't strong enough to survive honest conversations about race, while others grow deeper through that honesty. I also learned that my voice had power. When I spoke up about my experience, it gave others permission to share theirs. The conversation that started with one dinner reservation revealed patterns of exclusion that had been happening quietly for years. Black families shared stories of being followed in stores, questioned about their presence in certain neighborhoods, and treated with suspicion at community events. White allies emerged from this conversation too, people who committed to paying attention, speaking up, and using their privilege to create change. Jennifer organized a series of community discussions about racial equity. Other business owners proactively examined their own practices and trained their staff on inclusive service. The local paper ran a series of articles exploring racial dynamics in our community. The changes weren't universal or immediate, but they were real. I began receiving calls from other Black professionals considering moving to our area, asking about the racial climate and community responsiveness. I could honestly tell them that our town was grappling with these issues in substantive ways, which felt like progress. My consulting business grew as local organizations recognized they needed help creating truly inclusive environments. The expertise I'd been sharing with companies in other cities was suddenly in demand right in my own community. I found myself facilitating difficult conversations about bias, helping organizations examine their policies and practices, and training employees on cultural competency. This work was exhausting but meaningful. Every training session, every policy review, every difficult conversation was part of building the community I thought I was moving to 8 years earlier. I was no longer trying to fit into an existing system. I was helping to reshape that system to be truly welcoming to everyone. My daughter, now in college, called me after seeing news coverage of the restaurant closure and the broader conversations happening in our town. "Mom," she said, "I'm proud of you for speaking up. I know it wasn't easy, but you changed things for other people who might have been treated the same way." Her words meant everything to me. I realized that part of building the world I wanted her to inherit meant being willing to name injustice when I saw it, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it cost me relationships or peace of mind. The restaurant space that had closed eventually reopened under new ownership, with owners who reached out to community leaders, including me, before opening their doors. They asked for input on creating an inclusive environment and hired a diverse staff. Their grand opening featured local artists and musicians from across the community, making it clear that everyone was welcome. Standing in that same space 6 months later, watching families of all backgrounds enjoying dinner together, I felt a complex mix of emotions. sadness for what it had taken to get here, pride in the community's response, and hope for what was possible when people committed to doing better. The incident that had started with a denied dinner reservation had become a catalyst for examining and changing our community's culture. It reminded me that progress requires people who are willing to speak uncomfortable truths, even when, especially when, it disrupts the peace of those who benefit from the status quo. Looking back now, I understand that the evening at the restaurant wasn't really about one hostess or one manager or one establishment. It was about a system that had taught that young woman that people who looked like me were less worthy of service, less likely to belong in upscale spaces, less deserving of the benefit of the doubt. The system that created her assumptions is the same one that taught my so-called friends to prioritize a business's reputation over my dignity. It's the same system that made other Black residents suffer in silence rather than speak up about their experiences. And it's the same system that tried to frame my truth-telling as divisive rather than necessary. But I also learned that systems can change when enough people demand it. When I posted about my experience, I wasn't trying to destroy a business, I was trying to create accountability. When community members chose to spend their money elsewhere, they were making it clear that discrimination has consequences. When new conversations started happening about racial equity, we were building the foundation for lasting change. The power I discovered that night wasn't just in my voice, it was in the collective response to that voice. One person speaking truth can start a conversation, but it takes a community committed to justice to create real change. To anyone watching who has experienced similar treatment, your perceptions are valid, your dignity matters, and your voice has power. Document what happens to you. Find people who will believe you and support you. Speak up not just for yourself, but for everyone who might face the same treatment in the future. To white allies watching, your response when racism is named determines whether you're truly an ally or just someone who's comfortable with diversity when it doesn't require anything of you. Listen when people share their experiences. Believe them. Use your privilege to amplify their voices and create change in your own circles. To businesses and organizations, creating inclusive environments isn't just about diverse hiring or community relations statements. It's about examining your policies, training your staff, and being willing to acknowledge and address problems when they arise. The cost of discrimination to your reputation, your community standing, and your bottom line is higher than the investment in doing better. The restaurant may be gone, but the conversations it sparked continue. Our community is still learning, still growing, still working to become the welcoming place we aspire to be. That work is ongoing, and it requires all of us to be honest about where we are and committed to where we want to go. My experience taught me that speaking truth about racism isn't divisive, staying silent about it is. When we pretend discrimination doesn't exist or isn't that serious, we protect the system that enables it. When we name it clearly and demand better, we create the possibility for real change. I'm Jasmine Brooks, and I refuse to accept being treated as less than human in my own community. That refusal started a conversation that changed our town. Your voice has that same power. Use it.